In the last video, we went over chimpanzees. In this video, we will be less specific and we will take a general view, and with Howard Bloom discuss several species who exhibit racist behavior, racist tendencies, and are predisposed to behaviors we recognize as racist. Firstly and quickly, 3 highly relevant studies which expose behavior within animals that easily can be translated into racist behaviors.
The Lucifer principle makes the case that nature has organized all life forms into complex teams which compete with each other in eternal biological conflicts. The Lucifer principle looks us squarely in the eye and confronts us with the cold and clammy facts. War, death, hatred, and violence are necessary parts of the genetic plan, integral elements of life and of creation itself.
Howard, I'm wondering if you could explain the concepts behind your book, The Lucifer Principle.
Well, the Lucifer Principle says that there are basically a trinity of things that drive us. And the trinity of things that drive us are the superorganism, ideas, and the pecking order. Basically, when you put those things together, you've got a conceptual lens through which you can see history in a radically different way.
What's a superorganism?
Okay, what's a superorganism? Let's take a sieve, and we'll take 2 sponges. We take the 2 sponges and we run them through a sieve into a bucket of water. What we discover is that these sponges are not the solid things we thought they were. They're actually collections. They're actually nations of cells, of independent cells. And when we strain them through the strainer, the independent cells go their own way. They're perfectly self-contained. They can handle life on their own. They don't need a community. But they do need a community. They need community so badly that they will gather together. Right now they're a soup. They're just a soup within the liquid. But they will gather together and reconstruct their communities over the course of the next day or 2 until we once again have not 1, but 2 solid sponges in the bottom of the bucket, just as solid as they ever were before. Why? Among other things, they've reconstructed not just a community, but their original community. The yellow sponges have all gathered with yellow sponges over on one side of the bucket, and they've made one solid yellow sponge. The red sponges have gathered on the other side of the bucket, and it's just red sponges from top to bottom, but it's a solid object. Not only do the sponges have a deep need for community, one so deep that they confuse us, that they actually manage to fool us into thinking that they are a consistent whole, but they have a deep need for identity to be with others like themselves. If a red one catches himself in the middle of a bunch of yellows, first of all, the yellows aren't going to want him very much, and secondly, he's not going to want to be there.
Is this a sort of sponge racism?
It's very much a sponge racism. As a matter of fact, if you can't get rid of it among sponges, then you certainly can't get rid of it among human beings who are a good deal more complex. What you have to do is move the kind of racism. Move it from the kind of racism that we see in Zaire, where racism means killing 500,000 people with machetes, or in Kosovo, where it means driving out 1 million people, to the kind of racism we have in the United States, which seems to us to be an appalling thing, but in reality is not, because if we compare it with those 2 racisms, we do not go after each other with machetes. We go after each other with words. Even the Reverend Elijah Muhammad used to go after me, a Jew, who's, child spawn of Satan, with words. He never came after me with a blade. He never came after me with a machete. He never burned my house down. If we can get racism, which is inevitable, down to the level of discourse, then we've accomplished an incredible thing.
Howard, one of the more radical notions in the Lucifer Principle, and this idea seems to fly in the face of what are the currently acceptable schools of the social sciences, is that our violent behavior comes not from our monkey ancestry, but from our microbial ancestry.
Our original ancestors were bacteria, cyanobacteria, 3.5 billion years ago. Primates of our kind have been around for at most about 16 million years. Primates like us have been around. We have only been around for 100,000 years, which is an absolute nothing. But the fact is, you could already see in the initial colonies of cyanobacteria that one group of cyanobacteria would go to war against a different kind of, but actually use poison warfare. They would use the weapons of mass destruction that we talk about. They would put out various forms of poisoners that would destroy their enemies but would not touch them. And one of the examples in the Lucifer principle comes well, a good deal further forward in history. Not only do we find these things among the 3.5 billion year old bacteria, we find them in these creatures. Well, if you've ever walked out on the shoreline, you'll find tidal pools. And the tidal pools are absolutely magical places. Inside of them, they have the most wonderful looking fluorescent little finger tubules. They just barely move in the water. And you could watch these things for hours. They could become the picture of paradise. Look how beautifully they get along with each other. Well, they don't. They don't get along with each other. Sea anemones live in colonies. In fact, you can find vast, vast mats of them. Those are huge, huge communities. Now, the sea anemones on the inside have the job of finding the food and absorbing it. But then there's a periphery of sea anemones, which are basically sea anemone warriors. And they are built to kill. Who are they built to kill? Other sea anemones. They're built to battle constantly for new territory with other sea anemones. We don't notice it because it takes place on a time scale to which we are not accustomed. However, if we were to fast forward it, take one frame every 3 minutes and do time-lapse photography, you would see a battle going on a monumental First World War, Second World War scale among sea anemones. If it goes on among sea anemones, how the fuck are we going to get away from it?
So, are we born with original sin?
We are born as fingertips of evolution. And there is a problem with being fingertips of evolution. Evolution is one of the most creative processes we've ever seen. We started in the first 10 to the minus 30 seconds of the Big Bang with nothing. We started with a ripple in something called a false vacuum. Just a little tiny ripple, and it was tiny. It was infinitesimal. And from that time on, we've ended up with subatomic particles. Whole new invention, radically different than anything that had ever existed before. Atoms. Again, a giant step up. One small step for subatomic particles, one giant leap for universe kind. Then we've moved to molecules, planets, suns, galaxies, and entire systems of galaxies, not to mention human beings like you and me. There's a small problem, though, with this evolutionary process, especially as it applies to living things. In living things, the process goes according to, well, it's what was called evolution red in tooth and claw. There's been a lot of debate about whether that was some sort of Victorian misnomer. It's not a Victorian misnomer. If a lion wants to feed her children, which is a wonderful and benevolent thing to do, any lion mother who doesn't want to feed her children is a child abuser or a cub abuser, as the case may be. But if she wants to go and feed her child, what does she want to have to do? She has to bring down a gazelle. And then she has to start to tear its guts out while its eyes are still rolling in its head and it's still very alive, and it's still very aware of what's going on in the last seconds of its life. So which is it? Is she an abuser if she refuses to take down gazelles and starves her children? Or is she the abuser if she insists on going after some gazelle and ripping it limb from limb while it's still alive? She has no choice. One way or the other, she has to be red in tooth and claw. We are children of the evolutionary process. And the evolutionary process happens to work by using destruction for creation. It's like a sculptor. In the book it says that nature and evolution are very much like a sculptor. You take a piece of marble and it's one giant unified thing. You take a chisel to it. What could be more destructive? You take a chisel and a hammer to it, and you begin to chisel and chisel the flakes away. You don't give a damn for the flakes on the floor. You don't think, is that flake in pain? Is that flake having emotional problems because it's been isolated? No, you just simply smash at the parts that need to be taken away in order to create the Michelangelo masterpiece that's implicit in the piece of marble. Well, unfortunately, the marble on which nature works, on which evolution works, consists of you and me and the amoeba in the pail and other living beings, or the antelope that's taken down by the mother lion. And we have feelings. And every one of us feels, I have a right to live. And I have a right not to be treated with savagery. I have a right not to have my guts torn out so that I can be fed to lion cubs. And indeed, we do have that right, which means that basically evolution has built something disastrous into us. It's built something absolutely diabolical into us. If you want to say this, it has built the devil into us. Not original sin, but the fucking devil itself.
If what you say in the book is true and we are hardwired for violence,
And we are.
well, how do we outrun the Lucifer principle?
That are down in the reptilian sources of the brain and the neo-mammalian senses of the brain that come from a really antique heritage as animals. They are the animals in our brain. Well, Plato knew what you and I both should know as well. There are animals in the brain. We have to learn to tame them.
If the evil and violence inherent in our nature is a creative force, ultimately, then why would living peacefully really be desirable?
That's a very good question, because if you live peacefully in a way that freezes the evolutionary mechanism so that there is no new creativity, monkey wrench the works. But the fact is that we have many ways of competing that substitute for violence and in fact are far more productive than violence. For example, which accomplished more, the battle with Japan in the Second World War, or the battle with Japan since the Second World War, which has been an economic battle, a battle of ideas, and a battle of organizational forms? Well, actually, we learned a hell of a lot from both battles.
And I was wondering if I could ask you to put your prophet's goggles on and tell me what you see in 20 years' time.
Well, I see two things happening simultaneously. I put together a book outline in 1985, complete with the research, called The Return of the Middle Ages. It basically said that people are going to go back into what Faith Popcorn calls cocooning, that they're going to respond to globalism with tribalism. That's the group where the new passions of the next generation are seething and boiling right now. Those are the groups which will someday move to the center and take over.
Ireland's native red squirrel could be wiped out.
A fleeting glimpse of our own shy red squirrel. Look again. It might be the last one you see. The red squirrel is native to Ireland, but its bigger, stronger cousin, the grey squirrel, is taking over. Over the past 10 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the spread of the grey squirrel. For the first time, it's been spotted west of the Shannon. The red squirrel has now disappeared completely from 3 counties, Meath, Westmeath and Louth. From Carlow and Kilkenny, it's almost gone. But the march of the grey squirrel seems unstoppable.
And our red squirrels are related to ones in Anglesey, ones in North East Wales and other ones in Mid Wales as well.
So they're pure native Welsh squirrels, born in Wales to stay in Wales?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're here to protect them.
Okay, Hugh, so why are we here today?
Well, we're in this little bit of broadleaf woodland, which is adjacent to the conifer woodland. Conifer woodland is the main red squirrel habitat.
Okay.
But we have a population of grey squirrels here, which periodically invade the red squirrel habitats.
Civilization carries a curse. The impulse to expand societies into empires. Humans have no monopoly on conquest. Long before man learned to conquer, social insects, ants, bees, termites, hornets, all were building empires with the tools of attack, enslavement, and oppression. The empire of the insects.
On a somewhat unrelated note, it's quite interesting that dogs seem to be capable of being speciesists.